Morning, Lancer family. Welcome to Teachers Sheltering in Place, Brewing Coffee, and Reading Poetry. It's Poetry Month this month, even though many of us are quarantined in our houses, but perhaps that's all the more important reason to maybe take a look at some poetry. Maybe get off our screens for a little while. And so a couple times a week, my hope is to try to do a few of these types of videos and share some poetry that I've been reading, ones that have stood out to me that maybe mean something more today than they might have before we went on spring break, for instance. Today's poem is called On an Unsociable Family. The author's name is Elizabeth Hands. She's an 18th century English romantic poet who often wrote under the pseudonym Daphne. So I'll read the poem to you guys today, and then I'll talk a little bit about some of what I thought was most interesting about the poem, and then I'll sign off and not take up too much of your time this morning. So I've got An Unsociable Family by Elizabeth Hands. Oh, what a strange parcel of creatures we are, scarce ever to quarrel or even agree. We all are alone, though at home all together, except to the fire constrained by the weather. Then one says, "'Tis cold," which we all of us know, and with unanimity answer, "'Tis so." With shrugs and with shivers, all look at the fire and shuffle ourselves and our chairs a bit nigher. Then quickly, preceded by silence profound, a yawn epidemical catches around. Like social companions, we never fall out, nor ever care what one another's about. To comfort each other is never our plan, for to please ourselves truly is more than we can. So I like this poem because I think it's one of those situations in which it found me rather than the other way around. Two things kind of stick out to me. On the surface of this poem, what we seem to feel like is happening is that there's a group of family members who maybe feel like that they are living alone or acting alone, even though that they are in a home all together. But on a second glance, when we look at this poem, there's actually a lot of words and phrases, more than 10 words and phrases that give this suggestion of togetherness. Now, I think that this poem's impact relies on the literary device of irony. Irony being a literary device in which we see a contrast between what the reader's expectations are and what the reality is, in this case, in the poem. And I think for most readers, although this certainly isn't the case for everyone, I realize, but I think for most readers, the word family has the connotation of loving and nurturing and of caring for one another. And yet, the reality of the poem seems like that these family members live kind of in between these contrasts. You know, we have words or lines that say things like that the family members, they are scarce ever to quarrel or even agree. We have them living between these contrasts in which they are all alone, yet shuffle a bit nigher. We have lines like, they are like social companions, nor ever care what one another's about. And I think perhaps most importantly is in those last lines where the family members never seem to seek to comfort one another, and yet they recognize that true happiness is something, quote, more than we can accomplish on our own. And so I think perhaps those last two lines of the poem are ones that maybe stood out the most to me and felt the most worth sharing, because so many of us are at home quarantining with not a lot to do, and that we are at home with family that we don't often have a chance to be with, and that we have this opportunity to connect with one another and not to take this time for granted that we have with each other. And yet, again, existing in between those contrasts, I think it's so easy for us right now to take for granted those opportunities to perhaps reconnect with those that we love. That it's so easy for us, and that we're even seeing articles that suggest it's okay for us to have screen time. And I think while I certainly wouldn't agree if the science is there for it, to say that also, what are we using that time for? Could we be using that screen time some to connect with families who are stuck in other places? Could we put them down and embrace those that we don't have an opportunity to spend a whole lot of time with? And I think when we look back years later on this ordeal, it won't necessarily be the screen time that we value the most, but that time that we had to spend with each other, that time when we're home all together, that I think will provide that true happiness that we can't seem to provide for ourselves, as the last line of Hans' poem seems to suggest. So that's my analysis for today. That again was the poem On an Unsociable Family by Elizabeth Hans. I'll put a link in the section below so that you can access that poem. Otherwise, I look forward to seeing you all again next week with another poem. And in the meantime, I hope that you and your family are staying healthy and sane while you're quarantining in place. All right. Have a good day, everybody.